Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again on this Sunday morning, either in person or virtually. Again, my name is Jihae Kim. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Art at the University of Arizona. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the last day of the 2-day symposium on photography and Asian diaspora in the Americas. I will moderate today's panel, and I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Anu Palakanathu Matthew. Anu Palakunathu Matthews' photo-based work draws on old photographs to re-examine historical narratives. Matthews' exhibition include the Rizzi Museum, Royal Ontario Museum, MFA Boston, MFA Houston, Victoria and Albert Museum, 2018 Kochi Mujlis Biennale, 2018 Photo Fest Biennial, and the Smithsonian. Grants include Joanne Goodman, McConnell Johnson, and two Fulbright fellowships. Her monograph, The Answers Take Time, was published by Minor Matters Books and Sepia I. Anu Palakunathu Matthew is a professor of art at the University of Rhode Island. She was also the director of the Center for the Humanities. Matthew is represented by Sepia I in New York City. Please join me in welcoming Anu.
Thank you. And I think I need to correct you. You're now Associate Professor, Dr. Kim. And I'd like to thank you for organizing this and your team, who's been amazing. As an artist, my larger work focuses on lesser-known histories related to South Asia and the US and my immigrant experience. My presentation today relates to my work on immigration that pushes back against anti-Asian and anti-immigrant sentiments. Sorry. Oh, I forgot I have to press it. Yeah, sorry. I'm an artist who draws on archival photographs to re-examine historical narratives, the legacies of colonization, and being an immigrant in the United States. I'm also an artist who's lived between three cultures and hence am both an insider and an outsider, and could relate to what James was talking about yesterday about his experience. I was born in England, and that's me as the first Indian Virgin Mary in England. I grew up in India and now live in the United States. Sorry. Living between cultures also gives me a different perspective, which is what I try to do in my artwork, to change perspectives. And as an artist, I'm especially interested in human stories. Today, I'm going to show you the work that includes the stories of Asian immigrants in the United States. The word immigrant has become almost a dirty word, especially at the current moment. Editor Grace Ali eloquently writes about the dichotomy of the perception of an immigrant in the magazine Of Note, where she writes, "Where some see autonomy, others see dependency. Where some see courage, others see weakness. Where some see a desire to take charge of one's destiny, others see a threat. Where some see dignity, others see failure." So moving on to the first body of work that I'm going to show you today, it's the first collaborative body of work that I did about my immigrant experience. On 9/12/2001, the day after 9/11, a Sikh gentleman, Sher Singh, was returning home to Virginia after working 2 weeks in Boston. The passengers on the Amtrak train thought he looked suspicious because he wore a turban and called the police, and so he was detained in Providence, Rhode Island, where I live. And this started a body of work called The Backlash of 9/11. As a South Asian immigrant, I was disturbed by the suspicious hate crimes directed at Americans and immigrants who were mistakenly blamed for the crimes in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. It made me realize that people who do not look typically American now live in an increasing sense of alienation. In this new reality, we're even more conscious of our skin color, names, and how others perceive us, and how these identifiers have taken on new and unintended meanings. This has especially been true after 9/11 for South Asians from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. The targeting of minorities is nothing new, including the Chinese, the Irish, the Italians, and the incarceration of the Japanese Americans during World War II. After 9/11, the people affected by the backlash didn't want their faces shown because they didn't want to be identified. So to accommodate this fear, I decided to use an icon that is unique to the individual yet unrecognizable to a viewer, the fingerprint. The fingerprint is an important part of the identification process for both immigrants and criminals. It is a trace of a person, and yet from it, the racial identity of the individual is not recognizable. Ironically, one of the first uses of the fingerprint as a form of identification was by the British in India during colonization. Oops, sorry. So this is one of the first pieces I did. A lot of kids were calling me Osama bin Laden. That makes me feel bad, angry, sad. How can they call me that? I'm just a little kid. One girl said to a boy from Bangladesh, "If you say that you're from Afghanistan, I'll throw you out of the window." Interspersed with these fingerprints are images of the eyes of some of the individuals whose stories I'm telling. The eye is also considered a window into the soul, and like a fingerprint, can also be used for identification process purposes through its iris recognition technology. An agent from the FBI showed up at my house. I called him in for tea. The FBI visited me because my name is Mohammed Sharif and I am brown. He was actually a professor at my university who'd lived in southern Rhode Island for over 25 years, but his neighbors called the police saying he was suspicious after 9/11. This was a collaboration with Siona Benjamin, and it reads "Eye for an Eye" or "Eye for an Eye." And as you may know, the text plays on Mahatma Gandhi's quote, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." The Backlash Project was my first collaborative project that I did about immigration. Now moving on to the next project, To Majority Minority. Over 8 years ago, I started this project to highlight stories of immigrants, to push back and resist the anti-immigrant and minority sentiment as the America of yesterday, filled with immigrants of European descent, is giving way to a new multicolored and multicultural America. Unfortunately, in 2025, this work is still relevant. As an immigrant, minority, and an American citizen, I'm triply aware that I and many others don't fit the historical stereotype of what an American is supposed to look like. To Majority Minority is a photography-based project that examines shifting demographics in the United States. By 2050, the populations currently labeled as minorities will become the majority. This work engages with that transformation by exploring assimilation, identity, and belonging among immigrant families. In today's presentation, I'll be showing you, I will focus on the Asian families that I collaborated with. And so this is a short photo animation, and this is Tuan's story and about a history that happened 50 years ago. So the work begins with the family photograph. And this video, a lot of times I'm walking into these families' homes and I've never met them before. And so my husband David usually assists me and sets up the lighting and the cameras and also distracts the children so that I can connect with the families, collect their stories, and go through their family albums. And so this goes through the whole process of the reenactment and also the photographs I take of the families. And the children help a lot with the posing and putting up of the equipment. And so everything collapses and fits into this moving suitcase. So when we open the family album, these memories just come spilling out. And when the families, the grandmother tells me the stories, sometimes it's the first time that the grandchild is hearing them. Oops. And then I take pictures of the family members reenacting the old photographs. And then put the reenactments into the original photographs and string them together in what I call a photo animation. I also take pictures of the families so that they can have something to put back into their photo albums. And when the grandparents pass away, these photographs take on a new meaning and resonance. So, immigrant. I like the comparison that Edwidge Danticat makes to steep the activism of the immigrant in the poetics of the of an art practice, where he says in an interview in The Atlantic, that experience of touching down in a totally foreign place is like having a blank canvas. You begin with nothing, but stroke by stroke, you build a life. This process requires everything great art requires: risk-taking, hope, a great deal of imagination, all the qualities that are the building of blocks of art. You must be able to dream something nearly impossible and toil to bring it into existence. And this is reflected in Isabel's story. Her family is from the Philippines. When we first arrived, my mother and I didn't fight about grades. Only about folding clothes and vacuuming. My mother told me not to worry about money. She said, we'll ask Oprah if necessary. And if there's photographers in the room, I had to create that chair using Photoshop magic. Oops. Sorry. Another factor that played a role in the increase of Asian immigration to the US was the Hart-Celler Act. Oops. Or the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which significantly changed US immigration policies, particularly for Asian immigrants. It eliminated the national origins quota system, which had heavily favored Western European immigration, and replaced it with a preference system based on family reunification and skills. This shift opened doors for increased immigration, and especially from Asia. I'm going to play this, this video. I think I may need help just playing it. Yeah, thanks. So how do I meet these families? A lot of it is word of mouth or contacts. If I visit another town, I contact the local photographer and they usually get the project and put me in touch with people. And social media has also been amazing for connecting with them. And you can see the grandparents getting really silly to make the grandchild smile for the photographs. I'm going to skip this. And this is an example of the social media that helps me connect with the families. My sister-in-law put me in touch with Vicky, who's from the Hmong community, and she invited me to photograph her at a community event. So not a lot of the families, or some families do not have family photographs because they had to flee or for socioeconomic reasons. And so in Vicky's case, we used the refugee document that they had. My dad served in the Hmong army during the secret war in Laos at the age of 12. He saw so many deaths at a young age and is still traumatized. We first arrived in Minnesota. A year later, I was translating for my parents. I was 16 when I met my husband. He took me into his car, so I had to marry him. I know the old way is expected by the older generation, but I knew that even though I got married young, I was still going to get an education and be self-sufficient. So I present this work in different ways. One is through projection. I've also created a 3D printed book that mimics a passport so that iPad Pro plays inside it and the inside mimics a passport. So I was going to end on a more positive note, but after James's presentation yesterday, I decided to end on this piece. I think I may need help with the video again. This is Susan Ito's family. After Pearl Harbor, my father joined the army to be patriotic and show that we were not the enemy. Oops. Okay. In conclusion, as the demographic landscape of America shifts, the question of who gets to be seen as an American remains contested. to majority minority offers an approach to positioning photography as a tool for resistance and reclamation. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave soon after this presentation. So if you have any questions, do feel free to contact me through my website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anu. Our next speaker is Pokchi Lau. Pokchi Lau is Hong Kong-born photographer and professor emeritus of photo media at the University of Kansas. His work on global migration and the Chinese diaspora has been widely exhibited and published. His research spans North America, Cuba, Mexico, Panama, China, Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, and currently Vietnam. Documenting the resilience and adaptation of Cantonese migrant communities. Please join me in welcoming Pokchi.
So the first image is my son. And this is a book called Dreams of the Golden Mountain. And I'm going to thank Heiji for inviting me to the center to present some of my work. I'm an old photo boy. So if I have a moment of losing my memory, please forgive me, okay? What is important is I am one of the many families that I've met of a long history of migration, not by choice, but by circumstance, and of course, political and economic. So I think it is important that we have a common ground, that I'm able to understand the subject matter that I investigate. And it's starting with my own family. The red button, right? Oh, left and right. Okay. So I left Hong Kong in 1969. And I was in Toronto, understanding the Chinatown. I saw an old man in a Chinese restaurant, black coat. It was very cold. It was in November. I decided that I should go in there, and he was eating a bowl of something. I see steam coming out of a bowl, and we was using a spoon to get tiger balm oil to put into that hot bowl of liquid, probably hot water, and swallow that tiger balm oil. So that image, although I didn't photograph, but I learned something, I began to question, what is the Golden Mountain? So to run away from immigration and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, I went to Halifax to work in the Chinese kitchen. And I met these old Chinese chefs in restaurants. I worked with them for a whole year and understand their circumstance, their families, and learn the language of Toisan, which had enabled me to use this language to photograph all the Chinese communities that I come across, including Cuba and Myanmar, Toisan speaking, and the descendants. So began in San Francisco in 1975 of Cantonese-speaking boat people. They were fishermen. So they're not used to wearing shoes. And they walk around the house without any shoes. And several years later, I visited them again, 1984. Their son was getting married. And you see these American beauties on the wall. So it's the first sign of getting Americanized. So whereas these are American-born Chinese, most of them could speak some degree of Toisan dialect. And this girl on the right is far more intelligent. She speaks 4 different dialects plus English. So after school, she would watch Disney at home. Getting into these places is a whole different story. So Uncle Lam. On the far left is the Chinese beauty pageant. A map of China. And then in the middle, right here, is a hand-drawn map of the names of streets in Guangzhou, where he still retains the memory of home. But I don't think he had ever had a chance to go back to China. So I asked the Vietnamese Chinese refugees, what did you bring? The first thing they brought on the boat was the altar, the family altar, although the family is illiterate. And the lady immigrant on the right, she was so happy to meet me because I speak Toisan, and she was so anxious for her granddaughter to meet me and be boyfriend. So I get the hell out fast. So what do the Chinese do? Laundry man. I always heard about that, but what was laundry all about? But I have never seen factories like this. There were several buildings in Queens washing laundry 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for $1.50 an hour. So it was kind of strange for this guy on the right holding a bottle of whiskey while on the job. Vancouver, still burning firewood. Check out the stove and the fireplace behind her. This is 1978. So how long did this stay on like this in the slum of Chinatown? And that's how I spend my time whenever I travel to major cities to figure out how did my ancestor make it in this country, in the Americas, for that matter. How were they able to survive? Do I have that kind of tenacity that they had? And then the ones moved into other areas of farming. Uncle G in Holtville, California, not too far away from the border. And all his friends were white, were all white farmers. Whereas in Seattle, they have Chinese Cantonese operas to entertain themselves and keep the culture going. So moving into the Midwest, Kansas City area, in the suburb, the beginning of a good life, away from the slum of Chinatown. You roast your own ducks. Like my friend Daniel there the other day, last week, he roasted his own duck. I don't know how it tastes. So Topeka, Kansas, Chinese restaurants. Third generation Chinese. New immigrants and old immigrants. New one on the left, Chinese that come in with money to buy property, Chinese from Hong Kong. And then immigrant family had lived in Salina, Kansas for a long time and moved to Lawrence, Kansas to retire. And he served in the military. So new immigrant on the left and the third generation on the right. Tonganoxie is a tiny little town in Kansas, I tell you. It's like 2 blocks. That's a town. So moving to Tijuana, Mexico. The Chinese restaurant on the left, Cafe Di Loto, and on the outside at night. Now, above the restaurant was a Chinese school. And the kids would go attend this school taught by one Chinese old man. He was so anxious that before he died, he must carry and give the Mexican Chinese students some Chinese culture. Mexicali, Chinese cemetery. And this man, Mr. Aoyang, is half Chinese and half Mayan Indian. He married his wife from Macau, and she passed away. And her name is here. Can you read what the name is? I can't quite make it out. Can you read the name of on the grave? Maria? Anyway, Maria Lopez. Now, as he was sweeping the grave, he hugged this cross. It's the first time I see a Chinese showing affection to his wife that had passed away. And that's a new grave. Maybe living in America has enabled us to be less concerned about how you look and begin to show your affection. I think America gives us that kind of freedom. We hug and kiss. In Hong Kong and China, you don't do that. And those are his parents on graves on the right. The mother is Manuel's the father. I cannot pronounce his name. Dorado. There's a Mayan Indian woman who got the family out of trouble from China. She was a Mexican. The whole family have moved back to China. 1945, bought a lot of land, property in Hong Kong. And the communists detained them until they have given out everything from farm to their houses and property in Hong Kong before the father was released. And then the Mexican government sent 2 planes to take all these Mexican citizens back to Mexico. And the Mexican mother was able to do that by proving that she was a Mexican citizen, but she spoke Toisan in the family. She learned that dialect. Pretty amazing. So the descendants, 1/4 Chinese, Mexican, Mayan mix. So it's Ash Wednesday. You can see the little ash crosses on the forehead. This is in Calexico, not too far away from here. I just wonder if the Tucson Chinese have any mixed race with Mexican, Indian. Has anyone done any research on that kind of diaspora experience? So Camp Pendleton. I heard of the Vietnam War and decided to check out the camp. These are Indo-Chinese. 1 or 2 of them have spoken Cantonese with me. Quonset Hut, American guy teaching English. Wichita, Asian American Festival. The national anthem and the flag on the floor get ironed. So that this is a new identity, being an American as Asian. I later told him that he's not supposed to put the flag on the floor. I stayed in touch with the family on the right. The girl is now 25 years old. Victor Tijuana in San Diego, half Mexican and half Chinese. So what happened to their hair is what intrigued me. And the real resemblance of the ears almost tucked into the back. I wondered genetically what had happened between the Chinese and the Mexican. So these two are brothers now. Panama. So the security issue is a big deal in Panama. Chinese often get kidnapped because they're known to be rich. And they run their grocery store behind bars. So on the left is the Chinese mindset, especially among immigrants. You make money. That's your goal. And on the right, people who have achieved and made money as immigrants. However, these families' children, among total of 4 school kids, were kidnapped. I think one of this boy and the one over here was killed, even though the ransom was paid off. So they buried all the bodies underneath the kitchen floor and put cement over them. That's the tragedy of immigrant stories. Cuba. On the left is the barracoon. In the field used to be sugarcane and tobacco. And the Chinese and indentured laborers lived among African slaves. And since the Chinese could not bring any women into Cuba, they intermarried with African slave women. And on the right are Chinese miners' graves in a small town called Mulahay in Baja. And I was told that these are graves of Chinese miners of this big copper mine in middle Baja. I just wonder how did it go through their lives being a laborer and yet of no identity. So I went further to look for the mines. On the left is El Cobre in the eastern part of Cuba. And I have 2 books with me. All about the interior of how Cuban Chinese live. So after the session, please come check this out. It might be outside. So, and I found out by reading some articles that a lot of Chinese miners among African slaves were dropped dead in the trenches as there were no candles in these tunnels. And when their bodies get stunk so much and they disappeared for a few days, they finally got dragged out and dumped on the drainage pool outside the mine. So we learned about that. I brought offerings to the graves. So Chinese tea leaves, sour plums, sausages, tea. So this is what I could do. As I'm doing my part as a Chinese descent, visiting their graves. So Havana, Chinese cemetery. There's only one name written in English. Armando, Armando, Ho. Ho is Ho in Cantonese. And this is Sagala Grande on the right. And the Chinese name here, Lei, Jie. So these are critical understanding. In the old days, we used to think that, oh, when they died, the body would be shipped back to Hong Kong and then to China. That's not the case. So deities, burial sites, rituals, Wan Gong, San Fan Gong, as they call it. Chinese Masons, big establishment in Cuba, 13 chapters on one island. And I found the same establishment in Myanmar. Since I speak Toisan, I was able to get in and understand them much further than just taking a picture. They allow me to photograph the secret book of codes. Castro, Fidel Castro in Havana, in the Chinese Association. So there's a book of portraits. Oh, I don't have it with me. I'll have this book though. In Cantonese, Chinese, Cuban, Chinese. I'll be able to chance to check it out. Oh, the portrait book is here. They're all holding a photograph of their ancestors, Chinese ancestors. And this is a Caucasian woman who married a Chinese man. And they were so poor, they dug out and left the bones on the shelf and took the bone box and used it for somebody who did. Caridad Amaran, a Caucasian woman, adopted by a Chinese man, and he taught her Cantonese opera. So I have invited them to go to China to perform several times. A Caucasian woman had written her story here and also in this book. How they make themselves available to me to spend several years with them to do this documentation. So they perform in Hong Kong in their costumes, and that's the daughter of Wong. Caridad again, was a descendant of a slave in Cuba, and the Guangong is in her house. And she got this picture from her father, who was very young and joined the Revolution Army. And they saw the Chinese very, very loyal to the Chinese general. And they swear among themselves to be loyal and fight for the Cuban Revolution. A letter from home to Cuba. The last remittance of money. There's a large amount of money, $364 is a lot of money. A guy who supported the revolution in 1959, and he said we really regretted it 20 some years later. So I began to put diptychs together of an American home of Chinese descent and their home ancestral homes in southern China. They left home on a boat and stayed in America. My mother on the left, Edmonton, Alberta. And no, this is a Canadian village in Kaiping, China. This is the last image. San Francisco and the dreams of the Golden Mountain. So should I end here? Good time? Good, thank you. So check out these books at the end of the session.
Yeah. And our third speaker is Susan Sponsler Carter-Svan, who was born in Seoul, South Korea. She was adopted when she was an infant and grew up on a farm in Iowa. She earned a BA in advertising design at Iowa State University and MFA in photography at Texas Woman's University. Her work explores issues related to identity and being an Asian American international adoptee and consists of photo-based artworks, which include ceramics, cyanotype images on fabric, encaustic paintings, installation, mixed media images, and quotes. Her work has been shown in Seoul, South Korea, Panama City, Panama, LA, New York City, Chicago, and Texas. Susan's work is included in numerous publications, mostly in my book, Photography in Korea, and Convergent Conversation by Margot Machida in Beckwell's journal, A Companion to Asian Art and Architecture. She works in her studio at the Goldmark Cultural Center in Dallas. Please welcome in Susan.
Thank you, Jihi, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm really honored to be included with such talented artists and scholars, and so I decided to do a brief retrospective of my work. This is the Twin series, and it was the first body of work that I entered and was accepted into a juried exhibit in Dallas, Texas in 1995. It was my first validation as a studio artist versus being a graphic designer. I was born with a twin sister. We both had pneumonia, but she died shortly before we were to be adopted. Twinning becomes a consistent theme in my work, sometimes subconsciously and other times a planned concept. Since then, I have wondered how different my life would have been with my twin sister, and if her presence still, or absence actually, still affects my life today. Whenever I meet twins, I think of her and I'm curious about their life experiences. These are 8 by 10-inch silver prints. I used 2 negatives sandwiched together to create the images and then solarize the images during processing. Of course, this was all before Photoshop. I purposely allowed dust to show between the negatives to add ephemera to the imagery, and the collage work was seen as intentional rather than a seamless piecing together. Assumed Identity was the title piece for my MFA exhibit in 1997. This is a color photograph triptych that measures 65 by 17 and 75, 17 and 3/4 inch. This body of work explores autobiographic issues related to my adoption from Korea by my American Caucasian parents and the relationship between my cross-cultural adoption and my experience as an Asian American. Like Asian Americans born in the United States, Asian American adoptees experience almost total immersion in American culture. But our broken link to our past culture via ancestry and tradition sometimes create a web of contradiction and confusion regarding identity. Some of the works explore the loss of ethnic culture and genetic links using grids to fragment my past, while others use grids to blend together family photographs, which document the love and attention that I've received throughout my life. Images of a loving home environment are juxtaposed with images showing my conflicting feelings of perceived societal pressures to reconnect ties to the country of my birth and to my birth mother, and the frustration of being assumed a recent immigrant based on my ethnic heritage. This is titled All American Girl 1, from 1996. It's a color photograph, again printed with sandwich negatives, and is 17 by 24 inches. My work has always been conceptual, and I continue to use different photographic processes and substrates to convey my ideas. This is Untitled Diptych. It's two 15 by 18 and 5/8 inch silver prints. On the left is my case photo, taken when I was left at the adoption agency, and it notes my Korean birth name and the year of my relinquishment. The map in the background is a map of Seoul. It was important to me that I locate a map of Seoul that had the Korean alphabet, Hangul, on it and no Roman English letters on it, so that it would more closely match the year and time of my abandonment. On my right is the 1-year portrait after I was adopted, combined with the map of Iowa in the background. Maps are a recurring theme in my work. This is the Baby Book series. It's 6 triptychs of silver prints documenting the book that my mother made for me. Family photos of me and my parents bookend each triptych. In the 20th century, American mothers often made baby books documenting the first days of their babies' lives. I now have my mom's baby book. The images are 11 inches square and 14 by 11 inches. The bottom triptych shows my identity bracelet from Korea on the left and my identity bracelet upon arrival in the USA on the right. My adult hands are inserted into the photograph, and this was originally a mistake that I intended to crop out. After I looked at the contact sheet, I realized my hands were important, showing my gaze as an adult on the book and my childhood images. In Search of American Eyes is a sculptural artist's book that discusses the double eyelid surgery that some Asian women have. When I was a teenager and obsessing over how to apply makeup to my single-lidded eyes, my mom told me about the surgery. It intrigued me, but in the 1970s, I had no way to see what that would look like. And I dismissed it as something too fantastical. And I didn't like the idea of changing myself to fit others' ideas of beauty. Some Asian friends told me about the tape for eyelids, but I couldn't find any, so I tried making my own using double stick tape. That was too time-consuming, and again, I decided to accept myself as I was. The images are laser printed on acetate, spray mounted onto metal pages, and linked with metal jump rings in an accordion format. The portraits of women, girls on the inside are accompanied by the words, "We embrace the beauty of our eyes." This quilt is called They Are All Loved the Same. The title and main photo are from a newspaper article in the Des Moines Register about our family. I was adopted from Korea when I was 6 months old, and 2 years later, my parents adopted a second Korean infant, my brother David. That same year, my mother became pregnant with my brother Dan, and 2 years later, my brother Bill. The other child in the photograph is my cousin Dee Dee. Birth children born to infertile couples who adopt is a somewhat common phenomenon. And on the right is a close-up. The other portraits in the quilt are of my grandparents and first cousins. First cousins on my dad's side of the family. I, my brother David, and 2 of our cousins who were adopted from Japan are shown with blank white spaces behind our images, noting the absence of lineal ascendants. Maps behind other family members indicate the locations of their births. These are cyanotype on cotton muslin. After my MFA was completed, I won the Carol Crow Fellowship from Houston Center for Photography in 1998. I had just returned from a trip to Seoul, Korea, where I participated in Space for Shadows, an artist showcase performance with 3 Korean adoptee artists who were living in Seoul. During that time, we visited the adoption agency and found my birth records and the death record for my twin sister, Kim Young-ya. She died when she was just 41 days old. I also was able to photograph her case photo, which I had never seen before. This is a close-up of the installation. The grid of 6 by 6 inch silver prints represents the calendar for the year we were born, and the last day is the date of my sister's death. Images and text include the news article about my arrival in the US, graphics showing twins in the womb and the twins in my extended adoptive family. When I inquired about my sister's burial place, the adoption counselor said, "Oh, honey, she was buried in a mass grave at the orphanage. They have since torn it down, and a highway runs over it now." I felt shocked, naive, and sad that a tiny child's remains were treated with so little regard. At the same time, I still feel thankful that I had a different fate. During that same time period in 1998, I was also commissioned to create an artwork for the permanent collection of the Korean American Museum by Young-Soon Min for the Korean Adult Adoptee Network conference in Los Angeles. I chose to create this quilt, Korean American Adoptees, piecing together our histories. I emailed a query to adult adoptees asking them to submit their stories, current photographs, and their case photos if available. 17 adoptees are pictured on the quilt along with their stories. The dimensions are 60 by 70 inches, and this is cyanotype on cotton muslin. Unfortunately, the Korean American Museum does not exist any longer, but Young-Soon sent my quilt back to me. I'm sad to hear of her death last year. In 2007, I started the Yellow Work series. I never liked yellow. Nobody wants to be yellow in America. To be yellow is to be a coward. Lemons are products that fail. Yellow peril names the fear of America being overrun with Asian people. Traffic signals and signs use yellow as a color for caution. My early dislike of the color yellow was closely entwined with my low self-esteem and my shame of being an Asian American. But in recent years, Asian American writers began to embrace yellow. We are taking back yellow as Black Americans turn black from a derogatory description to being powerful in the 1960s. Naming ourselves yellow now comes from acknowledging a history of racism and the strength of our survival. The title for this piece is Yellow Power, and it's written in Korean Hangul alphabet and photoshopped into the image. The edges are intentionally pixelated to indicate that the Hangul was computer generated, as I can't speak or write Hangul Korean. This is titled Transplant. I found that dandelions are native to Eurasia, meaning they evolved and spread across the continents of Europe and Asia. A common theory suggests that dandelions were brought to North America by early American settlers, potentially on the Mayflower, as they were valued for their medicinal properties. Today, we think of dandelions as weeds, something to be removed from American lawns. But I feel an affinity for dandelions as an outsider and transplant. In 2012, I started working with encaustic. using photo transfers of old family photographs. This is titled Mom and Me. There's a Korean map in the background along with an adult portrait of me. It's encaustic on a 2-inch wood cradle, 23 by 24 inches. The image on the right is a close-up. Family pictures were important to my mom and dad and to my grandparents, aunts, and uncles. Portraits of my mom and dad and their siblings were a few pose portraits, but most were candid photos taken with Brownie cameras in the 50s and early 60s. Family gatherings always included a group photo taken whenever my uncles and families visited, as well as at holiday gatherings. This is untitled. It is my brother David and I. I incorporated a map of Iowa in the background. You can see my love of maps here. It's also on a 2-inch cradle and the size is 30 by 30 inches. The Hoodie Project is a memorial photo series instigated by the tragic murder of Trayvon Martin. It features artworks motivated by the iconic image of the hoodie, which Trayvon wore the night he was murdered, and its implications for race, representation, and prejudice. The reference to the hoodie also highlights the popular dialogues that arouse surrounding the hoodie in popular culture, including the ways in which the garment has marked certain bodies as dangerous. I invited fellow community college students, faculty, friends, and others to be photographed wearing a hoodie as a visual protest to racial violence. The Hoodie Project widens the discussion by giving voice to other innocent young men who were shot either by mistake, like Brandon Robinson, an unarmed college football player shot by police, or killed by racial violence, like Vincent Chin, who was beaten to death in 1982 in a Detroit suburb by 2 white auto workers at his bachelor party. It is titled Justice. When the 2 men who murdered Vincent were finally charged with his assault, they each were fined $3,750 and given probation. A civil suit for the unlawful death of Chin was settled out of court in March 1987. Michael Nitz was ordered to pay $50,000, and Ronald Evans was ordered to pay $1.5 million at $200 per month for the first 2 years, and 25% of his income, or $200 per month thereafter, whichever was greater. This represented the projected loss of income from Chin's engineering position, as well as Lily Chin's loss of Vincent's services as a laborer and driver. Lily was his mother. Evans left the state and stopped making payments in 1989. Chin's killing prompted the creation of activist coalitions and a shared sense of Pan-Asian identity for the first time in U.S. history. The case has since been viewed as a turning point for Asian American civil rights engagement and a rallying cry for stronger federal hate crime legislation. This is cyanotype and inco dye on white linen. This is a triptych of glitched photos using signs from the Black Lives Matter protests. They're digital color prints. This piece is titled Dissent Matters, and it is installed on a painted wall. The ceramic fragments represent the U.S. flag. Images appropriated from media reports on the Black Lives Matter protests are mounted on glazed ceramics using waterslide decal paper. This piece was one of the first works in which I created ceramic works and printed photograph images onto the ceramics. This is one of my most recent pieces from 2019. It is called Invisible. Wallflower is a derogative term that was used in the 1970s for a girl who stood by the dance floor waiting to be asked to dance. The term was associated with plain or unattractive girls. She's so plain she blends into the wallpaper. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, boys would gravitate to my white girlfriends without acknowledging me, even though I was standing right next to them. To the boys, white boys, I was too Asian. Later, when I began to socialize with Asian groups, I wasn't Asian enough because I was adopted and grew up on a farm in Iowa. And now that I'm a senior citizen, I'm starting to feel invisible again. This is an installation view. It's a digital image printed on adhesive vinyl, and it's mounted directly onto the wall, like wallpaper. This is the short video, In Search of American Eyes, which is a continued exploration of eye surgery and eye makeup, like the artist's book of the same title. In it, I interview 4 Asian American women about applying makeup to their eyes. I include my story also. I will now stop sharing screen to play the video. If you are watching on Zoom, the YouTube link will be provided. Thank you.
Yeah. Our final speaker is Brian Van Lau. Brian is a self-taught Vietnamese American photographer based between Honolulu, Hawaii, and Los Angeles, California. His work is about searching for fictitious evidence and using the tool of photography to explore and marginalize interpersonal and generational relationships. His first monograph, We Are Just Here for the Bad Guys, is to be published and produced by the Lightwork organization and announced later this year. It is a 2023 Aperture Portfolio Prize runner-up, a recipient of the 2024 Google X Aperture Creator Labs Grant, a winner of the 2023 Innovate Grant, a selected participant in the New York Times Portfolio Review, and the founder of Arcanite Pictures, an online platform and publisher dedicated to highlighting emerging artists. His work most recently was exhibited at the, excuse my pronunciation, Hoike Aka Gallery in Honolulu, Hawaii, as part of Floor On, curated by Phil Jong, and lectured at the Northwind Art School in Port Townsend, Washington. He's been commissioned and featured on New York Times, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, Vogue, and many more. Please join me in welcoming Brian.
All right. Hey, thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Oh. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you so much. This is my only second time ever actually speaking about this project and one of my first times ever speaking publicly. So please be patient if I'm kind of stuttering over my words. I just want to go into some background context on my biography before I get into the project. So my father was a Cambodian born and later adopted after his immigration through Vietnam and Hawaii as a child. And as part of his assimilation to the United States, eventually lost his ability to speak any Vietnamese until a few years leading up to his passing. I was born in Hawaii with my mother being white and her having grown up in rural Edwardsville, Illinois, until she joined the Air Force where she met my father. Around the time I was in first grade, my father was sent to prison and released at the end of fourth grade, though the reasons as to why he was incarcerated weren't revealed to me until much, much later. During the summer of 2019, after nearly a decade from his absence in my life, my father suffered a stroke and requested for me to live with him in Vietnam. Not knowing when I'd return, I moved in with him in Saigon, where I'd spend the next several months attempting to find my role in his new life. As we were settling into our move from Hawaii to Washington prior to my start in high school, he abruptly divorced my mother, leaving me, and began a new life as an entrepreneur across Asia, eventually remarrying to a woman I never met in a wedding I was invited to in Saigon. The majority of our relationship was held over stilted vibraphone calls, resembling more of a professional meeting between colleagues rather than a father and son. The time spent in Saigon was mostly comprised of conflict between his new wife and I, and a constant reiteration of my burden to her and the new family, mostly due to my inability to understand or speak Vietnamese. I hadn't realized until yesterday about the deep shame and belittlement I'd felt during this time were my first true feelings in acknowledging that I was not Asian enough, and that this sense of alienation would become a repeated and unconscious theme in my depiction of Asianness throughout this project. While I had primarily been photographing with hard flash as just a means of available equipment that I had on me at the time, I wanted to point out the beginning inclusions of this unflattering hard flash allowed me to render quotidian scenes like family dinners here with an emotional charge and externalize our conflicts for each other. A few weeks in, my dad had been diagnosed with grade 4 glioblastoma, shortening his lifespan to 9 months to a year, even with a radical brain surgery. Eventually, a surgery was scheduled, and we preemptively said our goodbyes in case the worst were to happen. This picture, there we go. This picture is actually the last one made of him prior to his surgery, framing him to me suspended between his pride as an impregnable father and his fear of mortality being confronted by me in the camera. His new wife and I stayed with him throughout the night, only for me to awake to them both gone. Surgery was thankfully already finished and a success. My father's process to recovery would take weeks, if ever fully regaining mobility. When he was brought home, I began caregiving for him, though the conflict between his new wife and I only escalated with the rising costs and responsibilities being placed on her, adding each day. One evening during dinner, I had an argument with my dad after overhearing his disapproval of my choice to be a photographer, calling it impractical and useless, fearing I'd be unable to provide in the future. That evening, I began searching for a book of pictures I'd given him the Christmas prior, only to find out after tearing through the apartment for hours that he'd not taken it at all. It was lost. I cried, lamenting that he'd saved his friend's tacky plastic shit on the walls, but couldn't bother to save anything I'd given him. And now that I'd be leaving soon, he'd have nothing of mine. What would I be leaving him now? The morning after, as a means of remediation, he proposed to collaborate on a series of pictures for what he believed to be his eventual recovery story. We made pictures for about a week before my departure. While not specifically instructing me, my role became clear and instinctive. I could tell when a picture was happening and when he wanted me to make one. We made pictures of his hospital visits, his physical therapy, the shaving of his hair, several very awkward impromptu family portraits, all in confinement to his apartment. Prior to his collaboration request, I've been photographing extensively throughout the city of Saigon itself, going on hours-long walks from one end of a district to another and back again. Most of my photographic consumption as a 23-year-old at the time leading up to this was taken from online photo platforms such as Flickr, Tumblr, and Instagram, being drawn to the diaristic documentary practices of photographers like Marissa Chaffetz, Olivia B., Lauren Withrow, Ryan McGinley, and Ian Klein, who all primarily use 35mm SLRs or medium format film rangefinder cameras, aiding in the creation of an impromptu and personal narrative focus, characterized by the light, handheld form factor of the cameras, which lended themselves to fluid movements and subjective lenses. Especially, too, I'm drawn to this vernacular as an example of the democratic nature of snapshot photography, becoming immediate, intuitive, and encouraged among non-photographers and amateurs. During this time, my understanding of lighting in general was minimal, giving way to quick setups and speed lights placed in corners of the room on a fly, resulting in hard flash, long shadows, and an unflattering look of my family subjects. When I returned to Seattle, Dad's condition worsened and pleaded my return, which I never ended up doing, fearing the closure we may have had during that last week to come undone once more. Months after I had returned to Washington, his conditions only worsened, and the remainder of our stilted relationship was held again over vibrant phone calls and the occasional updates from my then stepmother. In March of 2020, he passed, and the pictures we made together carried for me what I felt was only the deepest failures and disappointment I could hold as a son. I can't create photographs of my father anymore. He'll never see them and never react to them the way that he did in the last months I shared with him in Vietnam. When I looked at them again that year, the pictures gravitated towards him as the express main character of the story, but I now saw that they were about the tensions in both of our ends being unresolved. On his, the protective responsibilities of trying to remain as my impregnable father in spite of his declining health, and on mine's, a criticality and anger tinge towards him when he knows which cannot possibly be resolved. When I returned to Seattle, my stepmother disowned me. While she had dedicated herself to caretaking for him to her very bone, I felt a deeper conflict within me. While almost no expense was spared in the building and celebration of my father's new life, I felt mine had slipped further in the cracks of a past life he had held and wanted to be absolved from. I felt my forgiveness and love for him was almost obligatory, calling my feelings of neglect, of anger, of shame ultimately. While I felt exile of my father's new life, I started looking at the life left behind, my own. I began photographing more intentionally around Washington State, and not only did the land begin to externalize my psychological response to his loss, but so did our familial dynamics in its wake. Reunions felt stilted and awkward, weddings felt like premature omens, and the family I still had seemed fractured and compartmentalized, secrets held in plain sight but never spoken upon. Whether I understood it or not, when I photographed my family years later, I carried the same tone and criticality I had against him to them too. I imagined myself not as a fly-on-the-wall photographer or a diarist who preserved tender moments, but almost as a crime photographer or detective. I needed a truth to be unearthed, and I looked to investigate and affirm the evidence of my father's love. This is a picture of my friend Sam putting a tie on for the first time in his own wedding. This was taken in spring of 2020 and essentially a marriage made to keep his wife, Ray, in the States before her visa would run out by the end of the year. I think I'm drawn to this picture as a means of rush performance, both for the actual context of their marriage, but also as an unintentional reconstruction of my father's wedding to my ex-stepmother. This is my auntie song outside of her new home in Portland. I think there's a lot of associations with pride, but especially irony to me. 6 months after this picture was made, Auntie Song sold this house due to the cost of being too much to maintain. There's an ongoing contradiction with the image of pride or commodified ideas of success being immediately undercut by their unsustainability to do so. I wanted to mention this for the reason of my father's incarceration being primarily due to several accounts of fraud, from wire and mail fraud, money laundering, and fake ID usage. The irony to me, especially in an identity fraud case, is this being the exact method for my dad to immigrate away from Vietnam during the war in the first place, giving himself a new name and nationality as a young boy. Here's my cousins, Alvin and Sheena, in their hair salon in Portland. My cousins and I have a similar story to their relationship with their father, who happened to be my father's best friend when they had known each other in San Francisco around the time I was 6. In continuing this project, it was important for me essentially, I'd use medium format film and the same cameras that I had shot back in 2019, continuing this for the next several years. And I wanted to use the same hard flash for it. During this time, I was referencing a lot of films and had the idea to structure this project in a similar way as one, looking for the establishing shots, characters, motifs, and framing devices in the work I'd already made at this point. I think now might be a good time to talk about the title of the project. We're just here for the bad guys, being one of the last lines and moniker of the school shooter protagonist of the 2013 faux documentary, The Dirties, directed by Matt Johnson. In The Dirties, the protagonist played by Matt Johnson and named Matt is a high school filmmaker who makes mock action movies in which himself and his friend Owen target the Dirties, or their real life school bullies as fictional versions of themselves, only to eventually propose to make a movie in which these mock homicides become real instead. As a faux documentary, Matt, the character, constantly films and performs with the camera, believing any moment could be part of his movie, and the line between sincerity and hyper-real begin to blur, and a meta layering of at times conflicting narratives. Emotionally cathartic scenes are set up to pop songs and abruptly edited away, calling into our acknowledgement of the current film we're watching, still being a construction of the very characters within it. In the end, the reveal of Matt being serious about his school shooting endeavors shifts our understanding of what and who the author of that narrative is. We didn't know we were aligning ourselves with the villain of the story until the end, making us both complicit as viewers as well as affirming mutual condemnation. This especially resonated as the intentions of the project within me began to blur as well, bringing me to question the authorship of the work that I was making, layered within a sincere collaborative proposal and the inclusion of posthumous reactions as both a means of dialogue, as well as constructed reimaginings and appropriated photography. Whose story was this? During this time, I was also looking at a lot of contemporary photographers like Susan Virginia Worsham, Tierney Gearin, Eli Durst, Joe Leavenworth, and most prevalently, McNair Evans. In his book Confessions for a Son, a similar autobiographical account of his processing of shame and the loss and unraveling of his father, McNair uses his childhood town, his father's abandoned workplace, and staged images of his father's belongings to form a lyrical account. The pictures, in his words, were about making an emotional experience that were coming out from the photographs. I think what's become clearer to me in retrospect is the lack of Asian photographers as reference points or even to inspirations during this period in making the work. I'd align myself closer with the white perspective. As I continued investigating and constructing a new narrative of my father's wake, I affirmed myself as being on the other and looking inwards. This is a self-portrait I made in Mill Valley, where my father had a lifelong dream of owning a home in this valley town, where we had spent most of my childhood prior to his incarceration. This being the same park and stream we'd play in when I was a young boy. The following quote I feel summarizes a huge equation understanding of my own experience in processing the work as well. Instead of trying to document the places and people of his life, I tried to make photographs of my first-person experience in those places, and thought if I could align these experiences in my research about him with a kind of an evocative call and response approach to photography, maybe I could create a cross-generational dialogue about family. In the summer of 2021, I returned to my childhood home in Hawaii and uncovered my father's briefcase at the bottom of a cardboard box in the shack behind my popo's house. This is the shack. This briefcase contained letters, prison documents, old checks, fake and expired IDs, and to my surprise, a collection of drawings and letters I'd written to him and to the justice system while I was in elementary school. A year later, I uncovered a letter he had given me in high school that I had forgotten. While the certainties I had of my father were quickly being erased, these items reminded me of the tactile evidence of his love and longing of me. In turn, the collaboration we made may not have been the intended result, but I now understand that this is one of my father's parting gifts, and perhaps my own to his. I read his case file and the restitution checks he was paying through, learning of his fake names, IDs for states I never knew he lived in, and eventually just found out that everything about his business was swept in part truths, hearsay, and quickly brushed over in conversation. My popo, his mother, eventually began recounting the details the more I'd return. After uncovering this, along with the newer influences I had in mind, I shifted the framework of my family's narrative from one explicitly about loss and trauma to one of allegorical appropriation investigation. Another shift occurred, leaving room for my father's authorship once more. This is a letter I was requested to write to the Hawaii Federal Detention Center when I was 9, asking for my father's early release by recalling some of my mom's spoiled pasta as a reason. If anyone is wondering, this letter did in fact help in his early release. Skipping a few years ahead, in 2024, we scattered his ashes over the Pali Highway, and I went to scatter the remaining into the forest in Nuuanu and beaches of Kailua. Something apparently stayed in his will was solely my and my now ex-stepmother's responsibility to uphold. This is the first time my popo had wanted to be a part of the making of these pictures, though the reasoning as to why evaded me. Later that year, his brother, my Uncle Jason, passed unexpectedly, to be found by my popo on a routine wellness visit. Jason's ashes were also scattered on the pulley, leaving only the plastic bag they were held in to keep alongside my father's. When I returned later that year, Popo had become more involved in this project, revealing more about my father's nature and his lieu of financial scams, the directions his marriages could have gone, bridging more of the gap in the timeline I was so absent and divorced from. Months after his death, the certificate was finally delivered simply saying that the cause was a coronary artery disease. A few words that simultaneously delivered peace to Popo, but a continuing lack of resolution to the rest of the family. It seemed so frustrating as this explanation was concluded so simply, but for Popo, this alleviated a bit of the guilt that she still carried, lamenting that I have 2 boys and I lost them all. On many nights, we spent hours making photographs together, often with my gung. I set up lights and constructed scenes to set them in the moments that I never witnessed. They became actors in a story that was never fully recorded, but only speculated on. My popo quickly became more of a collaborator than ever my father was before 6 years ago, proposing ways to interview her, things she'd wanted documented, asking when we'd be making pictures again. One night, she uncovered a chest full of photographs she had made since the 70s, all wrapped in plastic grocery bags, and pounds to hundreds of pictures. We uncovered Jason's yearbooks, her trips to Australia, Tibet, China, and stacks of family albums encased in age-protected plastic. This is going to seem kind of obvious. There was a full circle moment in realizing that it was my popo, my mother, who had already found the simplest means of holding unspoken dialogue with my family as record keepers and documentarians of their respected sides of the family. It was in the act of picture making, and the pictures as evidence themselves. The vernacular I thought I was borrowing from online platforms initially was more symptomatic of the family album diary, which only further affirmed my fondness of this approach. I staged a picture of Popong Gungung at the site of which I had spread some of Dad's ashes. They were initially unaware of my reasoning in wanting to make this, but expressed their eagerness to continue making, laughing throughout the process as the act itself had become the purpose of their participation at this point. Unknowingly, this process of collaborating on these photographs with me had become the cross-generational dialogue between beyond the moments to moments, in a way that was really impossible or at least inaccessible to us before this. The photographs, archival, incriminating, theatrical, in a sense, becomes a third place, or silent and evidentiary dialogue between entities unable to intersect freely otherwise. As the family album became a fictitious and dramaturgic record of interior histories, the photo book parallels this function, expanding upon and allowing narratives to interweave. My aunts told me how morbid Popo's outlook had become since Jason's passing. She'd outlived two of her sons now, both through their illnesses, their buried secrets. She told them often that she was ready to die, exhausted by the life that she had witnessed in the wake of it all. One morning, she pointed to the pictures of Jason and her mother in the memorial shrine on the shelf and told me she didn't know who would do this after she passed. Who would remember this? The more time I spent with Popo, the more she began to fill the role as a protagonist in the story, a narrator, and fittingly so. She was my stand-in for a history I was unable to experience firsthand, and beyond being a collaborator, I understood that she was taking agency over the authorship of her own story with her sons too. What began as requested collaboration from my father became a larger story, and then a collaboration again with my Popo and Gung, participating in a theater of their own retelling and becoming actors unto themselves. To me, this has been about what photography really becomes, which I now interpret as the act of holding evidence silently, and the tool of collaboration unveiling our implicit desires for connection, memory, and lingering efforts of adaptability and assimilation. Throughout this project, my father's identity shifts from an undocumented or falsely documented refugee child emigrating into Hawaii to an Americanized child who loses their Vietnamese language, to a father looking to return back and losing his own kin in the process, leading me to pursue my own ties to my Vietnamese heritage more, both for my family and geographically. This is an excerpt from the letter my father snuck to me after high school that I uncovered several years ago. And here's the line that had always stuck out to me. Be careful what you put into your mind, what you read, what you watch, who you hang around with, what you listen to. It is rarely the big thing, but a series of small things that will have an impact on you in life. And there you go. Thank you.
So now we'll begin the Q&A session. So photographers, please come to the front for a discussion. Yeah.
One more over there.
Oh, okay. So thank you. So I'll take advantage of asking question first, and then I'll open up the floor to the audience. Well, there are a lot, really a lot to discuss. But the first question, just to open up further discussion, is about the issue of visibility. So always in relation to invisibility, but at the same time, hypervisibility. But this is also related to essentialization. So like you are forced to essentialize yourself, but at the same time, you're refusing essentialization, but at the same time, continuously failing. So it's kind of like always struggling with even myself, like this desire and frustration of essentialization, because all of your works address family photographs. So like absence and presence of your family members, like twins, father, and also ancestors. They are visible, but at the same time, really invisible and also hyper visible. So, and also like these family photographs in all your works, and also in general, as a vernacular photographic practice, is for me like something like a gesture to visualize something that cannot exist, like missing family members, but at the same time, class mobility and love or even a sense of belonging. So I wonder, like, how you want to elaborate further about all these like dynamics or tensions or failures or frustration over these impossible uh, like continuously because you are image makers, takers, like how what makes you continuously continue to 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 make things visible or keep failing. Yeah.
Well, in my lifetime, I've witnessed so many deaths within my family, like my parents, but I never witnessed the death of my grandparents on both sides of my parents because we were separated from China, from Hong Kong, and then to the Americas. So I never saw really any one of them. So in my mind, is something so deep in it that I'm anxious to meet my ancestors. I couldn't even dream about them because I haven't had any contact. So I opened up my mind to other possibilities. So when I was in Cuba, I made a point to visit Chinese cemeteries in different towns and cities. It's very important to me that these ancestors, although we have no blood relations, I need to respect them. I need to pay my respect because a lot of them have been forgotten. I assume that you go to many major cemetery, military cemetery, you feel the people that have devoted their lives for some purposes of one kind or the other, they deserve some respect. So to me, it's my obligation. I went to the same one in Myanmar. You're talking about the boondocks and mining towns. There were grave without any marks, just a piece of wood, nothing else. Now, why is that the case? And they're put right next to Cantonese grave marks. And these ones don't have it. Maybe they've lost everything. In Hawaii, on a big island, I see one stone with a surname of Ye, but no given name. However, beneath that is Miss. So I don't know what happened to this woman, but the name of Ye, but no first names. So have they been forgotten? What kind of status was it that moved her from China to the big island of Hawaii? So I'll let Brian answer.
My project is mostly about my perspective. From my almost white side, trying to understand and discover my Asian heritage at this point. And then I think that going back to my framing of it being more as a film, I don't think of it as a chronological process, but more as like you're finding pieces that can kind of correlate to each other post active or after the fact, I guess. So.
I think that as an Asian woman, I'm constantly fighting between, like you said, being too visible and being invisible. And when I was younger, I always got attention from men that I did not want attention from because of the fetishization of the Asian submissive woman and the war brides. One time we were in a grocery store, my husband and I, and the checkout woman asked if I'd met my husband in the military. And so I guess I guess that in my images, I'm always kind of looking for my twin sister. And because she is a twin, I can use my images of myself to stand in for her. And there's also the desire to be remembered. Being an adoptee and not having any birth family. And then my husband and I, unfortunately, never had children. And so, after I'm gone, that will be it, I guess. So,
one more note. Yeah. I would say too, speaking from like an emotionally cathartic standpoint, I think from my Asian side of the family that communication is not always the best, and that there needed to be some means of cross-generational dialogue happening in a way that was nonverbal. And that's essentially what came of the family album. That's what became of businesses and of cooking and things like that.
I want to add a little bit to about ancestry. On the Cuban Chinese portraits, I have 8 to 10 Afro-Chinese Cuban portraits. So some of the Afro-Chinese portraits are holding their ancestor photograph in front of them, so the portrait is taken. So I asked myself further, if they use these Chinese ancestral photograph to remember their ancestors, what about the African side? They were slaves. What happened to them? They couldn't trace them. You know how they do it? They dream. They close their eyes and dream. So I went all the way to Africa, where a lot of these slaves came from, to the villages where they finally settled from escaping Muslim jihad attacks, Christians, Protestants, Europeans, you name it. They stay in the northern part of Togo and Benin. So these earthen living communities, they preserve their ancestry by making a cut in their face. So I photographed a woman. Now, by the way, these people have no school, no water, no electricity. Okay? They have no written language. It's all verbal. So they have a person in the family to tell them about their ancestors, that they know they are people in the Americas. They were slaves. They know what they do. They sleep with their ancestral by little earthen mounds on their bedroom, which is a circle, and they sleep among their ancestors, and that's how they could communicate. So my finding was that, wow, different people in different parts of the world have a different way of respecting their elders and their trust they place upon them. So I think we need to look into, as fragmented as we are in our society and our families, how do we trace back to our ancestral roots? What have we learned from them? I think this is something vital that somehow I cannot neglect. And I hope my son someday will remember my ancestors.
Okay, I think now I collect the question from the audience. So there will be microphone around. So if you have any questions, okay, be here.
Hey, thank you for sharing all your wonderful projects. I would like to invite all of you to share maybe some reflections or experiences with how your work have been exhibited and the reactions to your work.
I've exhibited my work pretty widely in southern China, Hong Kong, and they never realized that Chinatown, the Golden Mountain, could be like that. That some of them live in such poverty, single room, bachelor society, widows living in one room in Chinatown. They were shocked. And then they saw the ones in Cuba. They couldn't believe there's such a mixed race, and that the retention of the Cantonese opera in Cuba. So I think I also have other videos, which I don't have any chance to show. I think they were just shocked that they feel ashamed. They have not really received that part of the old culture as something significant. So the modern life has a whole lot to do with it.
I've only exhibited once, and it was at the Leeward Community College Gallery in Hawaii, and that was in January of last year. But it was really just an insular experience in which it was the first time that I was able to reconvene with my mother, who hadn't been in Hawaii for 13 years at that point, and also my Popo Gungung, my Lao side of the family, as well as myself. This is the first time that they're ever actually seeing those photographs, especially a letter that I'd given to the judge. So it was just a communal experience, I would say. But specifically just for the family involved.
My work has been exhibited, the early work has been exhibited widely, but some of the latter work has not been exhibited much. I did show the video and the invisible portrait in New York, and mostly a white audience. And a lot of the reaction I got to the eye surgery was, just outright shock that they had never heard of such a thing. They never understood that there was such a thing as single lid eyes, and sympathy too at the same time. And then I guess other than that, just a lot of questions about adoption. And when I exhibited in LA with other adoptees, and there were some early films coming out from adoptees about their experiences, I learned a lot more about the dark side of adoption, adoptions where they were not successful matches with the families, which is impossible to know, or other circumstances where the child had been kept at the orphanage because their photographs earned money for the agency. And so they were not adopted until they grew old enough for their portrait not to attract money. The agency that I was adopted through was much more, humane. It was a whole adoption agency. Other agencies they're like the ones that you right away, and they say that if you give just $10 a month, you can save a child's life, that kind of thing. And the children were required to write back to their sponsors, that kind of thing. So.
Hello. Good morning. I'm Gia. I've been doing the marketing here at CCP, so apologies if the video stuff is a little awkward. But I'm especially moved because I'm a daughter of immigrants, one being from Cuba. And when I went to Havana, I saw Chinatown, and I was also amazed by that diaspora, but also not very, because in Latin America, there's many Chinese communities. Also in Venezuela, where my mother is from. This is not all to talk about myself. I guess like this question is for Brian specifically, because I was really taken aback by this idea that you're trying to do these intergenerational dialogues, because there's already like a distance, but yet like this layer of interpreting it or approach, rather, like a cinematic approach, feels like another way to further distance yourself from something you want to draw closer to. And I want to better understand that, because when I went to Cuba when I was in college, I was disowned by my father. He was a political exile, and he could not understand why I needed to go back, because that whole history is never spoken about. There's a lot of pain around that history. So when I told him I was going, he disowned me, and I thought to myself, "Oh, this is very literary. It's like it was always the third generation, the daughter who returns, who has to look back into the past." And I'm still interrogating that like positionality because I don't know if it's the correct one, but I needed to adopt that in order to feel like my mission was acceptable, like it's part of a universal one, at least within a particular literary canon. So I'm curious if you have anything to say about having to like sidestep to get closer.
Yeah, I don't feel like I was distancing myself at all. I think that maybe it's because filmmaking was the medium that I'd always been kind of attributed to. Filmmaking, manga, anime, anything like that. I'd always been attracted to storytelling. And I think being able to position myself inside one of those stories was how I was able to kind of better understand the exterior perspectives. As a child growing up, you're trying to interpret what you don't know. And coming from the other aspect, it kind of builds out a world where, okay, now you kind of understand like what these contexts may have been, or okay, now I can understand what my father's character motivation was in this instance, and that's maybe why I can provide sympathy for him after the fact. But I don't feel like it was. I would really recommend that you watch The Dirties, because there's a moment in that movie where the protagonist Matt, he's reviewing footage of himself from earlier in the movie where he's being like physically bullied, and he's replaying it over and over in like a montage setting. And at a point, one of the off-screen characters asks him, "Do you feel anything?" He's like, "No, it's so. I'm so like this doesn't even feel like me at this point." But I don't know. I feel quite the opposite because I'm still participating in the making of this, I guess.
Well, I have a lot of questions on my note, but another issue, it's all of you, is about site, like SIT, not CIT. Well, could be both, because like site, so like location and also dislocation, so like locating, but dislocating, but at the same time, uh, while listening. Well, it could be CIT too. While listening to your presentation, like Susan and Brian, you don't speak the language, right? Hangul or Vietnamese or other languages. But in case of Bokji, you speak multiple languages. So it's kind of like maybe like inability to speak the language maybe facilitate your locating or citing, or in different way. Maybe your like fluency in Toisan and others might really like rather than helping, but like disrupting or frustrating because of like it's also related to transparency, right? So like I wonder like what to think of like these ideas.
I think the choosing location is critical for me. First, I have to find a Chinese community that can speak either Toisan, Cantonese, or Putonghua, Mandarin. So, in the case of the recent one of Vietnam, the Chinese have been there since 1,500 years ago. And the last migration in large amount of numbers is around 1900s. And the reason I would choose Vietnam is that there's a Chinese community that will speak Cantonese. And My other friends have been there before and visited. I saw on YouTube. They speak Mandarin with the Chinese in Vietnam. Yes, they're courteous. Yes or no, sit down, buy coffee, or drink it outside. But if you want to get inside, you have to speak Cantonese. And this is the same case in Myanmar. This is way in the countryside, in the mountains, in the central northern area where some of the conflicts, civil war is happening. They're extremely cautious of who you are. So you speak 普通话, yes, you'll be outside. Once I spoke Toisan with them, I got invited inside, have dinner, sit down and chat, don't hurry to go home. So and in case of Vietnam, they're willing to tell me stories, how they escape Vietnam to the outside world and return to Vietnam with their homeland. Now they're speaking in Cantonese. It's a Cantonese Vietnamese, looking at Vietnam as their homeland, not China. So to understand them in that aspect, you have to use their language to understand their background that may not be in any textbook at all. So it's important that how I choose my site to work. So my next one may be Madagascar, Africa. Sunda people, Chinese, primarily Cantonese again. I'll see what I can do.
For me, the choosing geographical locations became almost like a proportional understanding of my degree of Asianness. So in the project, I'd spent months with my father in Vietnam. I'd shot through like hundreds of medium format rolls, but the only pictures I wanted to use were inside of that apartment. And I thought that was very indicative of my understanding of any historical or any cultural reasoning for the images of Vietnam in general. I'd had these things in downtown, in the districts. I'd had them in the hospitals, but there's just no cultural touchstone that I understood. So the only thing I could actually respond to was just in these very insular family dinners or in his bed, and with no really kind of context to where we were. Without even having like an explanation of that, I think in the pictures there's no understanding of where these pictures are even being made. And when I started looking back at the pictures after the fact, I realized that there's other dialogues that were just I was incapable of having without them being back in Hawaii, because there was just so much imagery that was inaccessible to me at the time. So I think that there's an almost a one-to-one that my understanding of my ability to have a dialogue is present in the geographical location that I had access to.
I think for me, I mentioned the trip that I took to Korea, and that was, of course, I was born there, but I had never been there as an adult. And that trip was very scary to me. I don't know, so I only spent 5 days there, even though, of course, it's a 12-hour flight. And so I would like to go back and photograph the area. I did do some photography while I was there, but I was kind of just more of a tourist mode. And then also I use maps and the globe to suggest place and geographic location. And then I have also one of the installation pieces that I didn't show has sweet corn. And that's one of my favorite meals, and Iowa is known for its sweet corn. And so things like that would, and then the baby book really is a citation, the bracelets and a lot of artifacts from my past.
Any other questions?
we'll have ample amount of time after this